This is Bobby Kimball, and I'm co-VP of the Central Chapter. And one of my responsibilities is to help arrange these wonderful talks with uh, people who have expertise in certain areas. And Jessica Merkling is one of those individuals here today. If you would like to ask any questions during the presentation, put them in the chat, and then we'll wait till the end unless it's something I see that Jessica might want to address right now. With that said, Jessica, take it away.
Perfect. Thank you, everybody. Hopefully this goes smoothly. State computers are set up for Teams, so it's been interesting because they took all of our Zoom accounts off. So hopefully we have a good presentation of today. So I'm Jessica Merkling. I am currently the only urban wildlife biologist for the DNR Division of Fish and Wildlife. I specify the Division of Fish and Wildlife because as we go through this presentation, I have found it's usually really helpful to tell people like where in DNR we are, because Department of Natural Resources is actually comprised of like 11 different divisions. So no, I do not work for state parks, don't work for law enforcement, I don't work for Division of Fish and or Division of Water, but I am Fish and Wildlife. So that just sometimes helps to keep in mind. But with that, we'll get started on kind of what I do, what we're going to do, and go from there. So today I'm hoping to cover what urban conservation is, some of our urban wildlife trends, what makes a habitat and the benefits of that habitat, and then some basics of creating and maintaining habitat that I'm going to guess probably isn't going to shock any of you. Some other considerations and resources that you may have available to you. So I'll start with urban conservation. So a lot of people in their minds, they have this kind of idea that conservation of wildlife happens out there. I get a lot of calls of, well, can't you just like move this wildlife somewhere else? Or I get, well, you can put habitat somewhere in the county, but not right here in the city where we can see it. I have had a lot of those type of conversations. So there's a lot of conservation that happens out there. So a good example is this is Oliver's Woods, which is part of Silty. And there's a lot of really good partners that are doing a lot to conserve natural habitats in these big swaths of land in a lot of places all over our state. But there's a lot less out there than ever before. And this is mainly due because of urbanization, which is just a spatial phenomenon where cities and towns are becoming larger and growing outward as more people start living and working in those areas. So that really means our out there is actually closer and closer to here. This is further important because for a while, for a period of about 60 years, we lost green spaces in the United States at the rate of 3 million acres a year for, like I said, for 30 years, right? And we know that there's estimations that 2/3 of the world's population is going to be in some type of an urban area by the year 2050. What's scarier to me is that 60% has yet to be built by the year 2030. And it's one thing that is always in my mind. It's really easy to dismiss those numbers if you're thinking like, oh, sure, they came out in the early 2000s. These were estimates in 2018, so it's not that old. And they've actually accelerated since then. Indiana alone, we expect our urban land coverage to double by the year 2040. So that's how quickly and rapidly we're accelerating our urban areas. We know that there's over 700 different species that can be found in different types of urban environments. A lot of those can be found in backyards. And we know Indiana is home to over 897 species of wildlife, probably more. For me, wildlife is all the things. For me, it's insects and fish and mammals and herps, all the things. So that's how quickly and rapidly we're changing. And that's why, for me, it's such a big argument is why urban habitat and having these conversations are so important. So I have a map of Greenwood, which I'm hoping works for you guys for reference. But so this was the Johnson County Public Library, just for reference, just east of 135. This map is only about 5-ish square miles inside. But this is a map of September 2003. Fast forward 10 years to October 10th, 13, because we have to work with what maps we have. But all those blue circles are new developments in some way, shape, or form. There's a community church, there's apartments and reserve at Royal Oaks, HOA, lots of changes. Then you fast forward another 10 years for this was July last year, so about a year ago. So again, the blue circles are all new developments in that first 10 years. But then the yellow circles are all brand new developments that we keep squeezing inside of these urban areas. Um, it's easy for us to assume like, well, sure, you can do this in Indianapolis or Fort Wayne or maybe Evansville, right? But today, I've yet to find a community that I haven't been able to see some type of this acceleration on there. And I even sometimes really challenge myself, like for example, downtown Fort Wayne's one of the areas that I cover. Um, Even in downtown Fort Wayne, there's always something more that we're tuning in there. And sometimes it's clearing out trees. Sometimes it's putting up big, massive buildings. Sometimes expanding those buildings. It's all the things. And it can be real easy to say, okay, so like do something about it with all your privately owned or your public, your state owned land, basically, right? Well, the problem with that is 97% of Indiana is privately owned. For the purposes of this conversation, privately owned just means not state or federally owned. This is not unique to Indiana. This is, I think, east of the Mississippi, something like 85% of the land is privately owned. So when we think of like those big swaths of land that the Bureau of Land Management manages out west, we don't have that east of the Mississippi. So that's why it's really important to talk about this urban development and really start talking to the private landowners, again, not state or federally owned land, and talking about putting that habitat in the ground. A really good visual of this. So this is from soil data and records that they think was about in the 1960s. And you can see how much forested area we have, how much wetland, dry prairie, all those things. But then you get to 2001, and that's how drastically we have changed Indiana. Indiana is arguably one of the most physically altered states we have. So that's why it's really important to have these discussions. And you can easily see the urban sprawl here in Indy, Fort Wayne, up in the region, South Bend, Elkhart area, going down to Louisville, Evansville, all those areas. So what is urban conservation? It's basically we look at wildlife in areas that are influenced by the built environment. And it's not just focusing on the wildlife, though. It's focusing on the relationship between humans and wildlife that are influenced by that type of ecosystem. What really happens a lot is sometimes people either move into an urban area or they start changing things in an urban area and they think that they're creating an area that wildlife doesn't live. That's not necessarily always true. Sometimes you're actually creating more niches for wildlife to take over. And this can increase human wildlife interactions, and they can be a whole spectrum from really, really positive to really, really negative and everything in between. So that's where we created the Division of Fish and Wildlife Urban Wildlife Program. Admittedly, the program's a little bit of a transition. There used to be 2 urban wildlife biologists. That hasn't been the case since about November 2021. I'm hoping that soon we'll have more coming in, but we'll see. That's still the plan. It's just probably going to be in a really delayed timeline. So in my job, I predominantly focus in Fort Wayne, South Bend, and Elkhart, and some of the smaller surrounding cities. Right now, it's kind of at my discretion if I have the ability to help in another urban area, just simply because I can't be everywhere at once. But a lot of what I look at is talking to people about how to live with wildlife, how to create and develop habitat, and then providing some of that education and outreach. There's also green infrastructure and sustainability into there, and that's one of the standalone pillars, but that kind of, I guess I feel if you do it right, that kind of automatically gets incorporated into the other pillars. So unless there's any questions about that, we'll get into some of the wildlife trends. I guess, do you have any questions that came up so far? Oh.
None yet.
None yet. All right, cool. That's a good stopping point. So we'll move on. So we'll discuss some of the urban wildlife trends that come from this idea of urbanization and urban habitat and all those things. So what we typically see with urban wildlife is they can utilize human food sources. They're typically omnivorous. They're generalists when it comes to food and habitat. They're very strong competitors, and a lot of times they can actually outcompete our native species, and you can especially see that with invasive species. They usually have a higher tolerance of human disturbance, and then they're pretty adaptable. So there's a lot of behavioral differences that we tend to see in urban areas. So one of them is movement and activity, and I kind of hate that I put a picture of geese on here because we actually finished a 5-year study about this. Geese are moving a lot more than what people think. It's just geese look like geese. So people don't know that. But you can influence things like delayed migration if we're feeding them, those types of things. If we're feeding them and never reminding them why to fly away from humans, it makes it a lot harder to spook them away. Increased reproduction, a really good example is the peregrine falcons when we reintroduced them on some of those skyscraper platforms as changed habitat forms. Being warmer, urban areas do sometimes allow for more clutches to be born. There's an increase in tolerance of humans. There's been quite a few studies, one about like raccoons, where they actually have a higher density around urban and suburban areas than they do in rural areas because they have a bigger tolerance of humans. And then the same thing, same way, they have different diet and nutrition because they're getting things like our trash, not just raccoons, but other animals as well. And they have different survival and mortality things that they have to face, like vehicles crossing, all these things. And what we see with all this is how we start managing wildlife in urban areas can actually affect the trends we see in wildlife. So when we decide to manage wildlife in a certain way, that in and of itself is some type of selective pressure. And because there are selective pressures in these modern cities that have higher amounts of people and a lot more people influencing them, that selective pressure is significantly increased. So we see things like increased nocturnality, increased problem solving abilities from wildlife, heightened tolerance and habituation to humans. They start finding these new dietary niches where they facilitate reproduction and survival. And what's also really interesting is no two cities function the same. There's some general trends, yes, but depending on how the city chooses to manage wildlife, what management options are available, all those things can affect, different parts of those behaviors. There's also, so this was a really cool study that we found because I think we talked already about like the generalities of wildlife in urban areas. And there's this big group study that they thought they would find like one single just common trait syndrome, which would identify in all the wildlife in urban areas that are commonly found. So they looked at 379 cities and 48 counties, and they looked at over 5,000 species. And they did find those commonalities that we've already mentioned, but there's other traits that varied, especially the foraging behaviors. So for example, beetles, birds, and reptiles, they in general had smaller body sizes, but the beetles actually had higher mobility from place to place, where birds and reptiles did better staying put. Some bees had a trend in shorter tongues to support one of those generalized diets when we plant the stuff that's really not native and beneficial. And things like amphibians and reptiles, they actually did a lot better if they just stayed put in a smaller area. So basically what it got at is that we can't just think about one habitat for one type of wildlife in the urban area. We still have to be thinking about multiple types of habitat for multiple species in these urban areas. And as part of that, there's a lot of, I call them myths that I hear about. So usually this built environment and these relationships, there's a lot of common myths that come out of it. So one, feeding wildlife is necessary. This is pretty much never the case, but it's very common. Fledglings and fawns are all injured or abandoned and need human assistance. Predators don't live in or belong in urban settings. I mean, this is in Broad Ripple. This is a coyote in Broad Ripple, and places like LA and Chicago have very healthy coyote populations. So Indy, Fort Wayne, Greenwood, none of those are any different. All snakes are poisonous, also not true. And then we have like this misidentification of species turn to rumors really quickly. So things like a single cat caught in a trail cam quickly becomes a mountain lion, all these things. And when we have these myths, we also have some of these quote unquote nuisance problems. I say nuisance because that's the way it's written in Indiana Administrative Code, even though I'm personally not a fan of it. Because being a nuisance means they can be removed at any time without a permit if they're causing problems on your property. But when you have these misconceptions, misidentifications, all these things, you create this demand to deal with this wildlife that may or may not be favorable to humans, plus their perceptions. So state agencies, we don't come out and just remove wildlife. We don't really have the ability to do that. That would be a massive scale. So that's why we then have wildlife or waterfowl control operators, just like most states do. So that's something to think about for this discussion as well. So I don't know if we can do this, but I'll pause there real quick. Do we have any other questions before I move on to the next section?
No questions in the chat.
Perfect. All right. I'm going to try and do this interactively. If you guys want to type in the chat, we'll see how it goes. Let's see if I can do this. So what are the 4 basic requirements of wildlife habitat? I'll give you guys a second to type them in. Water, food, water, shelter. So we got 3 of the 4. We're missing one more, and it's a really important one. You know, one more second just in case anyone wants to try and jump on here. Nesting places is close. I would say that's probably under shelter. But I'm going to move on here so that we don't, so we can keep going. But so food, water, cover, and space. We have to have space for that wildlife to get from point A to point B. The number one reason we're losing biodiversity across the world is habitat loss. And part of that means the space to get from point A to point B. Essentially, if we don't have the habitat, we're not going to have the wildlife. If you lose it, they're going to disappear. But if you build it, they will come. But if you manage it, that's how you get them to stay. So I might try a little more interaction. So if we look here, where is the habitat in this picture? Are we seeing anything of real high value here, or is it mainly just turf grass? Right? There's a couple of trees, but otherwise it's a lot of turf grass. What about here? You've got lots and lots of fields that are all monocultures, but like other than this, like what looks to be riparian-esque, it's just a big monoculture of our crops, right? And Indiana is known for their crops. And then what I commonly deal with here, where is our habitat? It's, sorry. There we go. Right? It's a lot of mown turf grass with very minimal habitat. Right? So when we talk about this habitat, the space and connectivity, we have a lot of barriers that show up in urbanization. So things like roadways, developments, all these things. And we need these corridors for wildlife to get to food, water, and other resources, to find mates, to find shelter, to disperse so that they have good genetic makeup, to migrate from point A to point B. I mean, monarchs are a really easy talking point right now, right? If they go large spanses without getting some of those nectar and pollen plants, how are they getting the energy to get from point A to point B? There's been a lot of studies that are showing, so those stopover forests next to urban areas, those are crucial for migrating birds, right? And when we have this fragmentation, we get these like islands and they can't really get from point A to point B. So we have to figure out how to get these corridors so we have less of these habitat islands. Because when we have this fragmentation, we lose habitat, they become more vulnerable to invasion, we have less genetic diversity, and then it leads to overall ecosystem decay. So going back to the same map we had earlier, and this is still the same map, but it's definitely stretched out to fill the screen. We might have some patches of corridor, right? Especially around in this picture here, right? There's a patch of woods here. But like, how are we going to start thinking about really connecting these spaces and gain point of view? There's a lot. I think right here, if you look, I'm guessing some type of right of way or um, telephone pole or electrical grid, right? But how are we going to start helping that wildlife move in those corridors? So check one more time. I don't see any questions in the chat, so I'll keep going through. So what are the benefits of native habitat? So a lot of times you'll probably hear people in my line of work will talk to you about the habitat. It's a healthy alternative to feeding. I will be very upfront and honest with this group. I never endorse feeding or like it for a lot of reasons. You can create those corridors. You're providing cover and nesting material. There's also ways that improves human health, right? There have been multiple studies about how green spaces and being outside can lead to increased health benefits, reduce stress, planting stuff in the right place. So, well placed tree, you can actually reduce your energy needs because the shade is helping your air conditioning be a little bit more efficient. You can use native vegetation to create privacy fences. And then planting native, if you're doing it right, it's a lot less maintenance. It's less watering, less mowing, less fertilizing, less chemicals, all the things, right? And again, that's probably something I don't have to convince this group of. But really, what's really cool is there's a lot of overlapping things that are beneficial to both humans and wildlife. And we'll go over all those in the next slide. And again, I'm probably not going to tell you guys anything you don't already know being part of Indian Native Plant Society. But the benefit is the clean air, water, and soil, which humans and wildlife need, right? We have diverse habitat because diversity is how you get more diverse species. Increased pollinators, which are the base of most of our food chains. If you're doing it right, Canada geese is a really hot topic, but using habitat to your advantage along water bodies can really help mitigate negative interactions with Canada geese. If you have something native and diverse already growing, it makes it a lot harder for invasive species to come in and take over those spots. Especially in urban areas, we have the heat reduction from the urban heat index. All these things are beneficial to planting native. And again, you guys are probably used to this type of diagram, but our native stuff has these really deep plant roots, right? We have stuff to 16 and 20 feet, whereas like our turf grass is really ever as deep as it is tall that it is mown, right? So basically, turf grass ends up acting as another impermeable surface. Whereas when you have these deep root systems, you're increasing water filtration. Almost all of Indiana gets its drinking water from an aquifer. And if we're not recharging those aquifers, what are we drinking, right? So these are all things to think about and what the benefits are to humans and wildlife. And you'll have wildlife receiving the direct benefits, right? You'll have like the pollinators, the bees. There's the rusty patch bumblebee, which they found doing really, really well in an urban area. Monarch butterflies. You have certain birds, raptors and songbirds, that do really, really well in urban areas. I mean, we talked about the peregrine falcon, right? Small mammals. And there's even some really good studies about herps around well-maintained detention ponds, right? So these are all wildlife that would receive direct benefit from planting native or planting good habitat. You're still always going to have wildlife that receives the indirect benefit. You're always going to have coyotes, deer that are going to take benefits. They don't really need you, but they're going to take advantage of it anyway. When we think about all those pictures that we saw where you have like the fields next to a tree line, next to an HOA, those are all edge habitats, which is what these guys absolutely thrive in. So that's something else to think about. And really the overarching thing is that it's this one health connection that we all have. The health of people is connected to the health of animals and our shared environment. And when we protect one of them, we're actually benefiting all of us, not just the wildlife, not just the humans. So I'll pause here, and I just saw what about feeding birds. So this one I'm probably in the minority on. I in general do not like feeding birds. A year or two ago, we had that big outbreak where we told everyone to take down their bird feeders. Regardless of mass scale die-off, I get calls about dying birds at bird feeders every single year. That being said, I'm also very aware that it is like the number one pastime for wildlife watching nationally. So it's a very hard dynamic. My recommendation is planting native. There's a lot of good resource about how baby birds can't even eat seed. They need 95% of their diet to be insect protein, and you're not going to have insects unless you have the good habitat. So I'm not going to condemn anybody. I just think if we're doing really good and really well, if you're doing the habitat, that's food, water, shelter, and space, and not just food. So I'm hoping I'm not alienating anyone, but that's kind of where I ended up leaning on that topic. Any other questions before I move on to the next section? All right, we'll continue on. So again, creating habitat, what does that actually mean? What can we actually do? The biggest thing is mimicking nature, getting those rain gardens and bioswales to slow down the flow of water, using the native plants that are going to be beneficial to our native pollinators, which then in turn benefits a lot of other wildlife, developing those root systems, one to recharge our water, to help with filtration and runoff, to secure our soils, our shorelines, all those things. Creating habitat, and then probably reevaluating what we think of as messy, right? Which is very hard to do because I recognize I say that. Being an urban biologist, though, I know full well there's a lot of HOAs, cities, sometimes even at the county level, where that makes it really hard to do because the legal perception of what you need to do to maintain a nice yard doesn't necessarily match with mimicking nature. But rethinking habitat, minimize turf grass, right? I mean, I grew up playing soccer. I have kids, there's grass in my backyard, right? There's places for turf grass. But if it's not being used, maybe you rethink about what it's there. If you guys haven't seen it already, Homegrown National Park is a really cool resource. Essentially, the premise is if you took half of what's in turf grass, now I'm just put into some type of native habitat in the United States, you would have a national park larger in area than all the other national parks combined because we just have that much turf grass. Thinking about allowing natural decomposition. I mean, you guys, like I said, Indian Native Plant Society, I'm not going to tell you anything you already know, but insects don't just disappear in the winter. They're in that leaf litter. They're in those stems that you haven't cut back. They're all around all the time. Box turtles are a really easy sell. They're overwintering in leaf litter. Some of our bat species are overwintering in leaf litter. So rethinking some of that is very helpful. Creating habitat, I think a lot of people want to just start it right away with well intention. But there's some things to always think about. It is a process, and it's a lot more than just scattering seed into existing lawns, right? Like I said, I'm not going to tell you guys anything you don't already know. But my first thing is always site selection. Always know who owns the property. Always look at your local ordinances. Again, I know that one's very tricky. A lot of cities do have a variance that allows for habitat. You just have to make sure you're looking where you are. What are your long-term goals? What is your ability to maintain that habitat? What are the site conditions? All those things should be considered. Ownership is really, really important. I've got a lot of people that have to deal with right-of-ways and things like that. I tell people all the time, most of the time they don't care, but when they care a lot. And it's really, really hard. But you can look at ownership. You can go to county GIS websites, things like Beacon, association boards, your county surveyor's office. Right-of-ways can be tricky. Some are responsive, some are not. And then you can look at the city, county, and private land areas. Those are all things to think about when you're looking at ownership. What are your objectives? What do you want it to look like afterwards, right? We have fact sheets that talk about this. Do you have a certain species in mind? What do you want it to look like? What kind of colors? What kind of heights? There's a lot about the height that can be really tricky to navigate sometimes. Like, so for example, in the pictures that you see, If you look at the sidewalk, you could probably guess that Canada geese is one of their bigger issues. But they also, this is on a dam that actually has certain requirements. And on the far side, they actually had a really big undercut from soil erosion. So they use native plants to try and help mitigate some of this, right? And then, so that was their objective. Their objectives was shoreline erosion was the bigger concern, plus Canada geese, plus it had to look nice, plus they had to deal with the rules and regulations being on a dam, right? So those are all things to think about. And then we kind of already talked about this, but do you want it to be a prairie? Does it need to function like a rain garden? Are you doing a tree planting? Maybe you're putting in a wetland. All these things should be thought about ahead of time. And then what's really important, especially on corporate sites or public areas that are privately owned, what is your timeline for establishment? Most of the stuff I recommend is by seed because it's most cost effective, but sometimes they don't have that amount of time to wait for seed to develop because they can take 3 years. Look at your available resources. Again, look at your time, your costs, your tools. What happens if, let's say you do tree planting and you're doing all seedlings and deer eat half your seedlings? What's your contingency? If you're planting right, it shouldn't matter too much, but it can still happen, right? We had a site in Mishawaka. They planted a bunch of seed and then they had floodwaters in 2015. What was the backup plan, right? Again, what are your ordinances and who can you talk to for technical assistance? And when I say look at your tools, so these two different sites, the same seed mix, right? The one on the left that my mouse is currently on, they mowed at the right time because they had stuff ready to go and they were ready for it. This side, it's all ragweed, taller than me. I'm 5'8" for reference, but this was all 5 to 6 foot tall ragweed. It does look nice now, but this was part of having those tools ready at the right time. They had to mow later. Like I said, it looks fantastic now, but that's something to think about. What are your resources available ahead of time? Your site assessment, like I said, I'm guessing you all probably already know this, but your moisture, sunlight, flooding, all these things are very helpful to know ahead of time. And you can go to the Web Soil Survey off of Google. It'll take you to NRCS and you can actually get a lot of this information right from the site that talks to you about well drained, moderately well drained, those types of things. I always say go look at the site as well, though, because sometimes it just, especially developed areas, water doesn't flow like we think it would. And sometimes there's a little bit of different contingencies to think about. And then what's your current cover for site prep? Because if you're doing native, no matter what, the biggest thing never to ever rush is that site prep. These are all different types of site prep. They're all done differently, but the biggest thing that you can see is they're planting basically into dirt. This one was a chemical application. This was planting into a cornfield after it had been picked. This was at my office when I told them to rip out all their burning bush. And these folks, they decided to do sod removal. Right, so there's a lot of ways to do it. Typically, I'm going to recommend chemical. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but sometimes it is the quickest, most efficient way. But this step should never, ever be rushed. When you're looking and probably prepping, you're going to look at getting your seed. You're going to want to try and have at least 18 different species. That's usually what myself and a lot of other programs will use because we're using the Natural Resource Conservation Services guidelines. But you want varied height, varied color. My general rule of thumb, if you're not going to have 18 diverse species, at least 3 colors blooming each in spring, summer, and fall. Think about your year-round aesthetics. What are your year-round food resources? Because different insects, different pollinators, they use different types of plants. And that's how you get that diversity. And that's what combats the invasion. And that's what helps keep our population stable. And a lot of people think about flowers, but shrubs and trees do a lot for pollinators as well. So thinking about those as well. Again, I'm probably not telling you anything you don't already know, but when you're looking where to buy, make sure you know where you're getting your seed from. We do have a seed supplier list. It's not exhaustive, but we do have one on our website. I know that Indiana Native Plant Society hosts a native plant supplier list. Other things to always look at are native plant sales. Indiana Wildlife Federation have one. I've seen them at county and state fairs before, and some local conservation groups also have that. Something that I tell a lot of people, and again, I'm probably not going to tell this group, but be aware of what's in the mix, not just what the mix is called. I had some lady, she said, well, I bought a native seed packet and I planted it and absolutely nothing came up. And when I'm reading it, she has things like Siberian wallflower and a bunch of other stuff that was just never going to bloom for the site conditions to be a native packet here, right? We've seen in the news, unsolicited seeds that came in the mail, so be wary of those types of things. Local seed is best adapted for local conditions. I've frequently heard within 200 miles is the best way to do it. That being said, that can be very costly for landowners. So sometimes, and I did it myself, my seed is sourced from a little bit further away. It's still native mix, native to Indiana, but I had to get a further source because it was basically half the price to get it further away, and that's what my budget was. So keep that in mind. If you're installing, seed is what I typically tell people. No till drill or broadcasting or frost seeding. Usually that's what favors the forbs or the flowers. Usually in the fall when the soil gets less than 55 degrees, or in the spring when it's greater than 65 degrees. Typically, if you're going to do the spring, I tell people to try and get it in by Mother's Day. We say no later than June 15th, but I try to say before Mother's Day. Never plant it too deep. I once had someone from Indiana Wildlife Federation tell me the correct seeding depth for any seed is twice the width of the seed. If you guys think about our native seeds, they have like teeny tiny thin little seeds. So scattering them on top is probably a lot better. If you do plugs, they can be a really great place, especially if you have pressures to have like really quick establishment, easier to visualize, or steep slopes. The only thing with that is to keep cost in mind, because I've seen it get to $10 a square foot, and that can be pricey. For trees and shrubs, know before you dig. In general, talking to the urban forester, plant 8 to 10 feet on center, and then shrubs either in between the trees or 3 to 6 feet on center. But then she told me, she goes, think about, again, your equipment. How wide is your mower, and can you easily get your mower around it? Because if you're going to maintain it easier by just being able to drive your mower in there, that might be something to consider. And I tell people every year, because it's scary, because it's very different from that picture I showed you with like the HOAs with all them on grasses, right? But I have fourth graders that plant half an acre every year, and I always tell people, I'm like, if a fourth grader can do it, you can do it too, even if it's scary. The first 3 years, if you're doing it from seed, and again, that's what I'm focusing on because that's usually the most cost effective. This is where a lesson in patience, and I promise you I'm not great at this, but being patient that first 3 years is really important. The first year, your seed sleeps. Second year, it creeps. And then the third year, it usually leaps. And that goes back to that slide I showed you with those deep root systems. Our native plants are spending the first 2 to 3 years putting down those really deep roots, and that's why it takes so long before they start popping up. You're always going to have to probably maintain, vigilance and maintenance for invasive or aggressive species. Keep in mind, depending on the species, you're controlling weed density, not eliminating them. Things like foxtail, ragweed, those are actually native plants that are beneficial. They're just probably not the goal, right? And then you just have to think about what your best judgment for weed control methods are. Typically, this is what my calendar looks like. In my ideal world, people are starting to prep in the fall with the intention of seeding in the following winter, if that makes sense. So hopefully when I slide through, it'll make sense. So beginning of the fall, that's when you're going to start treating those cool season grasses, because that's what most of my urbanites have. Then you're going to follow up in the spring if you need to. And then you're going to repeat the process as necessary. Again, that site prep really should not be rushed. Typically, I really like dormant seeding in the late fall, winter. You can even do it with snow on the ground. Just want 2 inches or less of snow. You don't want too deep. And then again, if you're going to do spring seed, preferably before Mother's Day. If you're going to do plugs, preferably before June 15th. But in general, I try to say get before May. And then again, the weed monitoring is always going to be an ongoing process. So consider what species you have in there, and that's why it's important to spend time out there, right? Typically, there's 2 mows the first 2 years, usually around 4th of July and again around Labor Day. And that's when you mow from 18 down to 8 inches or thigh high to calf high. And that's where you have to look at your equipment. Not everyone has a high mower. I don't have a high mower. I have to like find someone to be like, hey, farmer, can you please come mow our property because we don't have a mower like that yet, right? Once it's established in year 3, you can just pick one, and that's usually when you start burning. There are ways to burn in urban areas, but depending on where you are, that can be really complicated. So sometimes mowing is the option. You're just mowing a lot differently. You're mowing a lot closer to the ground if you can get that mulch out of there. If you can't, you're probably just mowing to 8 inches. But then every 3 to 5 years is when you're doing something to reduce that, because a lot of our native plantings, they're early successional habitats. So unless we do have some type of disturbance, they're going to keep getting woody. Indications of good beginnings, again, being patient. There's always going to be weeds. Things to look for that can help you be encouraged. Look for things that are growing in rows if that's how you planted. Look for plants that grow quickly. So like partridge pea, black-eyed Susan, that's probably why you see them everywhere in all these plantings. That's a way to create buy-in. Watch for incorrectly identified species. So this one, you may be tempted to say this is the Canada thistle. This is actually one of our native thistles. So thinking about that. And then know that you're going to be in an urban area. So along those rivers, developed areas, you're probably going to have invasive species that you always have to combat. Again,
Quick question for you, Jessica. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're totally fine.
So for the mowing time periods, what is that based on? Why is it ideal to do the mowing on 4th of July and Labor Day?
So, and that's not what we typically want. And you can see on this next slide, because you typically want to avoid April to August. That's primary nesting. You just do a little bit at the beginning because you want to, like I said, you're going to have stuff that comes up right away, but that other stuff's putting down those roots. So you need to cut back and get sunlight and resources down to those things that have not yet come up. A lot of times you'll plant in a cover crop. And that, like, for example, my planting, it's almost 2.5 acres. It has oats on it right now. We let the oats establish to be a cover crop, and then we had to cut back the oats to get stuff. So that's why you're doing that, if that makes sense. My office where I told you they did the burning bush, we planted native. I literally just hand cut it to help get it established. It took me a minute to like be brave enough to do it, and then when I did it, it really was worth it.
And I see that we're coming up on the end of our time together. I did see one other question in the chat, and I'll see if I can unmute that individual because they asked about, I'm going to unmute you because you did ask about a website, and I wasn't sure what website you were inquiring about or what topic she was covering.
Sure, and I can, I'm actually coming up on that, so I can whip through there real quick if that works for you guys, and I can show you that because I actually have it coming up.
Great.
So again, year 3 and after, we talked about that. Assistance. Other things to think about, we can go through quickly. Watch your pets, educational signage. I love cut plant, but maybe you don't plant that where something's wet, so be mindful of that. There's other ways to enhance your habitat. Give yourself plenty of time. So like this is that progression, like it'll take time. See, don't give up. But the resources, so we have wildlife.in.gov that has our seed suppliers, some of our fact sheets, your district biologists, if it's not me. So we have some webinars. We actually have 2 webinars about planting backyard habitat that goes into a lot more detail. I'm sorry, it's a lot more of me talking. We have a seeding calculator at the NRCS website. The web soil survey is what I was talking about, where you can literally just Google web soil survey. And it's an NRCS website that talks about the soil types. It'll tell you your rain, your moisture, your slope, all those things. Your county soil and water conservation district offices are good resources. And then Purdue Extension also has a lot of good information. So those are all resources that you can go to. And then No. But there you go. Sorry. I kind of ran through that last stuff, but that's where a lot of those resources are. But I can leave that up for now so you can look at it.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Jessica. I really appreciate you spending time with us tonight and sharing your knowledge. I did put in the chat for everybody, since Jessica was talking about purchasing native plants and where to find them. We are having a native plant sale, the Central Chapter is, and we're having that on August 31st at Holiday Park Nature Center. The sale will be from 11 a.m. to 3 p.m. We've got over 100 species that we're selling. There'll be around 1,000 plants, so we've got some good stock to share and or for sale. And that address for Holiday Park is also in the chat. It's 6363 Spring Mill Road, Indianapolis. If you have never been there, it's a great place to visit too. And so we hope you can join us then. Anybody else have any questions for Jessica tonight before we have to say goodbye to each other?
And I don't know how you guys feel. If you want to unmute, I'm okay with that. It's whatever makes everybody feel comfortable.
I just unmuted for a second, if that's all right. I'm starting with a much smaller garden, sort of like you said at your office. How many species do you need to have be successful? It's going to be tough for me to get 18 species into that area. So should I just be focusing on trying to get something blooming at all times, even though it's a pretty small starting spot?
It also depends on your goals. So like, for example, at my house, I don't have to worry how people feel about it because it's not a public space. So I think I have over 18 species in different plug forms all over my garden out front. At the office, I had to definitely scale back because that's a really narrow strip. So I just focused on 3 colors blooming in spring, 3 in summer, 3 in the fall. So that's probably the minimum I would focus on. It just kind of depends on the aesthetic too, right? Because there's planting native to make it like a small little plot. That's still beneficial, and you can get 18 species in there. It's just not going to look like our traditional landscaping, if that makes sense.
And I did want to remind everybody, we do have a hike coming up on this Saturday. It's at Avon Outdoor Learning Center. We do still have spots available if you'd like to join us on that hike. It starts at 10 a.m. We do encourage registration for that, but if you're not able to register, we won't kick you out of our hiking group if you want to join us. And then our next speaker will be coming up on September 18th, and that's Bats' Native Plant Steward. So that should be a wonderful event. Again, that's September 18th at 7 p.m. And with that, Jessica, thank you so much for your time. And we appreciate all the knowledge that you shared with us today. And
I put a couple quick links in the chat for some of you all if you need it.
Wonderful. And it looks like Cheryl from Texas put a comment in the chat. So that's wonderful to see somebody from so far away.
Thank you all so much. And if anyone needs anything, please feel free to reach out. You guys have my contact information. So.